Good afternoon and welcome to City Club of Portland's Friday Forum, Oregon's premier public affairs forum. I'm Sue Thomas, president of City Club, and I welcome you all, those of you here at the Governor Hotel and those of you listening on OPB or KPBS radio or watching on cable television. Thank you for joining City Club today on Friday, November 6th for this week's Friday Forum. Our speakers today will appraise the values and restrictions of our region's urban growth boundary, but first, some announcements. In consideration of those sitting close to you and those in our radio and television audiences, I ask that everyone in the room who's not already done so to please silence your cell phones. Thank you. As always, we offer our appreciation to our Friday Forum corporate sponsors, whose generous financial support makes these time-honored City Club luncheons possible. Please join me in thanking our sponsors, the law firm of Baron Lieben and Zimmer Gunsel Frasca Architects. City Club's annual fund is in full swing. Donations to the annual fund play a significant role in supporting City Club's civic engagement efforts, including discussions, neighborhood tours, and these Friday Forum luncheons. To make a donation to the annual fund, you can simply use the envelope that is on your table and hand it to the City Club staff in the back of the room, or go to the City Club website at www.pdxcityclub.org. As we mentioned last week, one of the things that's emerging out of City Club's strategic planning process is our desire and our renewed commitment to help new members find their place in the club. I asked last week, and I will remind again for anyone who's interested, one of the ways that we hope to do this is to have folks who are willing to come to Friday Forums and personally welcome folks who are new to City Club and new to Friday Forums. So if you're a regular attendee of these events and you like meeting new people and you would be willing to help out, please let the staff know in the back of the room. Next week, City Club welcomes Congressman David Wu. Congressman Wu will discuss why government support of job-producing growth industries will be the key to the state's economic recovery. And now on to today's program. Portland's population is expected to experience extraordinary growth in the coming years. Planning for this unprecedented growth is a fine balancing act. How can the region's planners preserve the urban growth boundary to protect farmland, forestland, and outdoor recreation opportunities, while ensuring that there will be enough land to accommodate new residents and businesses? Today's two speakers will discuss the delicate balance between the region is working on to achieve as Portland's urban planners make decisions about the utilization of the region's land in the next 50 years. They will also offer alternative perspectives on the best way to manage the region's projected population growth while maintaining its quality of life. Our first speaker today is Metro's first ever Chief Operating Officer, Michael Jordan. As COO since 2003, Michael is responsible for the integrated management of Metro's public services as well as its economic development assets. These assets include transportation and growth planning processes and an urban green space and park system. Prior to his arrival at Metro, Michael served as a Clackamas County Commissioner. With a graduate degree in public administration from Lewis and Clark, he began his career in civil service as city administrator for the city of Canby. Our second speaker today is Hillsboro Mayor Jerry Willey. Prior to his election as mayor, he served for 5 years on the Hillsboro City Council and was the city's Finance Committee chair. He is a partner in Jones & Roth CPA and has a diverse range of experience in business consulting and financial services. A Vietnam War veteran, Jerry served in the United States Navy. He earned his BA in Business and Accounting from Washington State University and is a member of the Oregon Society of CPAs. And now please help me welcome our first speaker of the day, Metro COO Michael Jordan.
So thanks for having both of us here today. I'm used to doing this shtick alone, and it's nice to have somebody else on the dais, and it's also nice to not be on the menu, just on the agenda, so appreciate it. My job here is to really try to frame what we're doing right now in the region regarding land use. The title of the program today is about the urban growth boundary, but if we've learned one thing over the past 10 or 15 years since the adoption of the 2040 growth concept, it is that all of the land use and transportation policy making that we do at the regional level is intertwined, it is connected. And there is a more holism to this than just managing a line on a map. And so I'm here today to try and frame those and tell you how the region has come to this place where we're making some significant policy decisions together. Those decisions, 3 of them that are coming up this year, at the end of this calendar year, are interconnected and are significant. One of them, and I'll try to explain those a bit and a little bit about how we got here. The first of those is called the Urban Growth Report, which the Metro Council will accept at the end of this calendar year. That report is required to be done by state law every 5 years, although this cycle we got a 2-year extension, so that's a 7-year cycle this time. What we really do is we take a 20-year look into the future, project population growth and employment growth, and then we examine the buildable capacity within the current urban growth boundary, and we determine whether that capacity will accommodate that growth. And if it won't, then we have some decisions to make. We can make multiple decisions. We can change policy and investment patterns within the current urban growth boundary, or we can move the urban growth boundary to expand its buildable capacity, or we can do a combination of those things. And we've done that on a number of occasions in the past, 1997, 98, 2002, 2004. We've done those things, and over that time, we've expanded the urban growth boundary by almost 25,000 acres. And we've had not too much to show for that. And it's one of the reasons that we have taken a somewhat different approach this time. The second decision is the Regional Transportation Plan. We're required to update that plan every 4 years. We actually took an extension on that update to move the update so it's in alignment with these land use decisions, because we believe in that holism and that policymakers should consider these things at the same time. The Regional Transportation Plan at its essence is a set of policies and a set of projects. What are we trying to accomplish with the transportation system, and what kind of projects are we going to do that? The last one, and probably the most notable, probably the one that's received the most column inches in the newspapers lately, and the newest to us, is the formation of urban and rural reserves. This region actually formed urban reserves in 1998, and then went through a journey through the Oregon litigation system, and 3 years later returned a technical reference back to us, a remand back to us, and by that time everybody was so tired and so upset that we just set it aside and haven't approached it since. So how did we get to moving all these decisions to the same place? It sounds like a certain unique form of insanity that one might try to do, and one I may tend to agree before we're all done. But it really grew out of our last experience in 2002 and 2004, when I think at the end of the day we'd moved the boundary some 22,000 acres in multiple places for both employment and residences. And at the end of the day, I think everybody on the political compass was absolutely exhausted and completely unsatisfied. And we looked at each other and said, you know, this just isn't working the way we want it to. We actually went to the legislature in 2005, we being Metro, went to the legislature and asked to change that 5-year cycle to a longer cycle so we wouldn't have to do this so often. And we failed. But in the dialogue with local governments and interests around development and growth management, we became much more convinced that we needed a change in the way we did it. And in 2007, together, all those points on the political compass together went to the legislature and got a piece of legislation called Senate Bill 1011, which gave us a new way to do urban and rural reserves. One of the big detriment, or one of the big problems, challenges with the system that we had gone through a couple cycles with this analysis and urban growth boundary movement, is that nobody knew where we were going from one 5-year cycle to the next. We could move the boundary, we could not move the boundary, we could move it in one place and not another. Local governments didn't know where we were going. People who lived on the edge, either outside or inside, didn't know where we were going. And the market didn't know where we were going. And I don't know about you, but markets that don't have good information don't work very well. And we're trying to figure out a way to inform everybody in this system a little better. And so we went down, got the legislation, got rules made, and embarked on the Urban and Rural Reserves dialogue, along with that every 5-year cycle for capacity and the updating of the Regional Transportation Plan. 2 years of task forces and committees and studies and analysis and focus groups, and I probably would be remiss if I didn't thank a lot of people in the room who spent lots of their time, private individuals, folks from the development community, folks who represent advocacy groups, lots of local officials and their staffs who met ad nauseum about this stuff and really brought us to, I think, probably the most informed place we've ever been regarding growth management issues. It prompted Metro staff to put out a report on September the 15th of this year, which really marked the changing of the dialogue from an information gathering and analysis phase to a deliberation phase. The questions and the issues are now in the hands of elected officials, both local elected officials and at the metro level, and to some degree at the state level, to think about where we're going over the long term. How will we combine our land use management techniques and our investment strategies to make this the greatest place it can be? The report, in substance, is not a dramatic departure from the history of this region, at least the last 15 years since the adoption of the 2040 growth concept. You will not see, if you read it, lots of radically different ideas about the way we're going. However, there are some changes in approach. First of all, this notion of interconnectedness, this notion of holism, the notion that if you make a change in the list of projects in the Regional Transportation Plan, it may have an effect on the pressure to move the urban growth boundary. It may have an effect on how much capacity we have for employment inside the current urban growth boundary. So those connections are incredibly important, and you'll see that theme through the report. Secondly, the other thematic in the report is a move from planning to action. We're the West Coast distributors of great planning, folks. We've had a little difficulty seeing those plans land on the ground the way we want them to. So you'll see a thematic there of moving this region from not just how do we plan, but what do we do to make this a great place. And then lastly, and I think most importantly, when we have done this in the past, we've done this projection of the future, and we've picked a point out on the horizon and said we're going to have that many people and that many jobs in 20 years, and then all dialogue about outcomes ended. And we started talking about how to hit that point, or if we were a little more pro-growth, how the point ought to be bigger, and if we were a little more anti-growth, the point ought to be lower. And the focus became the point, not what we were trying to do. And so the Metro Council and the Metropolitan Policy Advisory Committee, which is made up of locally elected officials, adopted a set of outcomes almost 2 years ago that all of this work is supposed to be aimed at. Now, I will grant you that those outcomes are broad brushstroke, they are certainly aspirational, and there is certainly overlap between those 6 outcomes. But I will tell you for sure it beats the hell out of trying to point at a number. We're at least pointing at something substantive to try and accomplish in the region. So let me talk a little bit about what we did and what the report says. At its basis, it is grounded in a look into the future. It's grounded in a forecast. So we've looked into the future 20 years and this time 50 years because we're looking at those reserves which are supposed to accommodate growth for up to 50 years. Some differences in the forecast than in the past. First of all, I mentioned the point. This time we've gone to a range. We know that interconnected nature of policies will require policymakers to need a little more room to run. And so the forecast is not hitting a point, it's working within a range. And we think that's an important change. Secondly, on the capacity side, how much capacity is in the current urban growth boundary? We have always based that capacity judgment on the zoning on the ground within local governments. So the local comprehensive plans of the 28 local governments in the region, we've used their zone capacity as the basis for what capacity is there in the region. We did that again this time, only we took a little more nuanced approach to that capacity. We've also learned in the last years that the market doesn't necessarily respond to the zoning in the same way everywhere. So we've taken a more nuanced approach to how the market responds to that zoning, and we've actually divided up that capacity into capacity that we're pretty sure is going to get responded to, and then a number of segments of that capacity which require other things. Some of that capacity sits on brownfields. Some of that capacity doesn't have infrastructure service to it. Some of that capacity has difficulty getting service because of intergovernmental problems. But we've tried to be more nuanced in that capacity judgment, and I think it has made the discussion a more full discussion. Also, I have to say, the projections around employment are the most sophisticated they have ever been. I was the chair of MPAC in 2002, and quite frankly, we didn't know what we were doing regarding employment. It was a real crapshoot. We have engaged consulting folks. We've asked focus groups of business people in the region to talk about the trends in their business. We've divided up the economy into huge numbers of clusters. We've tried to predict each of those. We've also segmented the economy across the landscape geographically to try and understand how those different segments of the economy work within those different geographic areas. And lastly, we've moved from what used to be a conversation about acres. How many acres does it take to supply this part of the economy? How many acres does it take? One of the big realizations in this is that different parts of the economy use different building types. Duh. And so we've done a much more sophisticated analysis of what kind of buildings do different parts of the economy go into and what are their acreage requirements. So for my money, a much more sophisticated look than we've ever had. The recommendations at a very high level. There's, by the way, I'll give you a website. There's 1,700 pages if you want to read them. But I'm going to attack them at a very high level because we don't have a lot of time. The regional transportation plan. Basically, the recommendations fall in 4 areas. If you're spending money, maintain what you have first and make sure that the system we've built in the post-World War II era actually runs. Secondly, use pricing strategies and technological strategies to make sure that that system gets the most efficiency it can out of it. When you are going to build something new, make sure that we supply the citizens of this region with choices about how to get around no matter where they live. It's going to be a huge issue as we move to higher and higher priced fuels, and it's going to be more and more difficult for folks to have choices about how to get around. And then third, again, this linkage with transportation and land use, to the degree it is possible to maintain a compact urban form, the investments you make in transportation will even be more efficient. I'm an old utility guy. More people per miles of line, more people per miles of pavement makes the cost for everyone go down. So, or at least dampens the escalation of those costs. So, those are the things around the RTP, very high level. The urban growth report, the basic line here is if you don't want to expand the urban growth boundary a great degree, you've got to think about how the public invests its money, where and in what, to allow the private sector to utilize that zone capacity that it can't currently utilize. That will almost entirely depend on where and how the public invests its money. So we are recommending limited growth of the urban growth boundary, but we couple that with a recommendation about an investment strategy that has to be put in place if you expect to do that. Lastly, urban reserves. The urban reserves process we're going through this time is different than the former one. We really have in the rule now 3 sets of criteria. One around the preservation of agriculture, one around the preservation of natural resources, and one around what does it take to make great urban places. Quite frankly, that's the area we've never had before in this notion about reserves. And the trick is to take those criteria, apply them to the landscape at the edge of the urban growth boundary, and balance those 3 sets of goods, if you will, to try and figure out where we will grow over that 50-year time horizon. And believe me, having done it, it isn't easy in some places around the boundary. And it is going to be a challenge for policymakers in some places to understand, because the land is good for practically anything in some places. And so balancing those criteria is going to be the test for policymakers. Lastly, and I always forget this recommendation, but it's absolutely important, We've recommended that policymakers adopt a common set of performance measures. We don't currently have them in the region. And so we need to allow future policymakers to have commonly held sets of data that will help them make these decisions in the future. It won't be a black box. You won't be able to shove the data in, turn the crank, and get where do we move the urban growth boundary out the other end. But it will make it a much more informed discussion than we've had in the past. So, at the end of the day, we believe there should be urban and rural reserves. We believe those urban reserves should be somewhat limited in their scale. We have recommended, although you won't find a number in the recommendations, about 21,000 acres of urban reserves, about 15,000 for housing and about 6,000 for employment, arrayed around the boundary. We've recommended that if you move the boundary this cycle, they should be extremely strategic and they should be linked to that investment strategy. And then lastly, and probably most importantly on this investment notion, you really do have to think about the areas within the urban growth boundary where we've already made significant investments in town centers, in regional centers, along high-capacity transit corridors, and in the employment areas that already exist within the region to be able to get the most capacity out of them. Here's the dilemma. If you don't, under state law, you will be required to move the boundary even more than you would have already. And if you do, it will still cost a lot of money. So we face this huge dilemma and difficult conversation with local policymakers who, quite frankly, have had a very fragmented approach to their public investments. Rightfully so. They have obligations within their own jurisdictions. But those investments are going to have to be what I have termed deadly efficient in the future. If they're going to get the kind of capacity out of the region that we want, and if we are going to be able to limit the expansion of the urban growth boundary. I'll close by saying I went through this in 2002 as a county commissioner, have gone through this process. It is infinitely better. We are infinitely smarter than we were in 2002. And the most important thing about this cycle that we didn't do in 2002 is we're doing it together. The 360 degrees of the political compass have been at the table actively for 2 years. We're going to make some tough decisions. Some people will like them, some people won't like them. But for my money, the really good thing is we know we can do this together. And when we do good things. So thanks for the time. Appreciate it.
Well, good afternoon. Michael has a little advantage on me. I've been mayor for now just entering my 10th month. So this process to me has been very educational, and I couldn't have done it without a very good city staff. So I want to take a moment and ask, just out of appreciation, I would like to ask every city staffer that's here from the city of Hillsboro to please stand, and I'd like to say thank you very much. You make me look good all the time. Of course, you have to have a good family, and my wife and my son is here as well, and even I got my son-in-law to come today, so I don't know what he's got up his sleeve. I'll probably find out afterwards. The perspective that I was asked to present is, as Mike has demonstrated, Metro has a regional perspective in everything that they do. When the policies and the rules and the guidelines and the vision is communicated down to the cities, it's handed to us with the responsibility that we need to participate in the same vision. And I think that's what the challenge to the cities right now, and that's what you're hearing in the dialogue, is that we need to participate in that vision in a partnership rather than an adversarial relationship. And we're working very, very hard to do that. To try and communicate, I think the message that I want to today in 17 minutes is a little bit like my first TV interview. I was about 2 weeks into the mayor, and the media came out, wanted to have a live response from me, Intel had just announced that they were going to lay off 1,000 people over the next 9 to 12 months in the city of Hillsboro. And the question was, what is going to be the economical impact of 1,000 people being laid off by Intel to Hillsboro? You have 17 seconds to respond. 17 seconds. There's no comment, of course, as to what's the economical impact of those poor 1,000 people that are going to lose their jobs. It was, what's the impact on Hillsboro? Well, fortunately, most of those folks have not lost their job, and they've been redeployed in Intel's other buildings and places. So, but I don't think we would have been able to communicate that message anyway. But I want to make sure that my message today is not communicated as a contrast to the COO's report. My intent is to reflect a regional perspective, although I am not their spokesperson. Much of my observations have a regional perspective, and some of you will easily hear when I become the mayor of Hillsboro and my perspective on that. The original focus of this endeavor that we're going through is to give certainty to those who are living on the boundary, the agricultural, and the cities, defining where the growth would go and where it would not go. Philosophically, who can disagree with a vision of the greatest place, where we can live and work in a region that embraces livability, biking to work or to the store or to a park, on bike paths that are actually out of harm's way of vehicles, hiking in the mountains, walking or jogging on nature paths, streets with sidewalks, having a job that pays a family wage, living close to where you work in neighborhoods with parks, and if you so desire, a lawn and a backyard. Or even better, buying produce from your local farmer, driving out in the country and seeing that local farmer. And there are some of you that already believe that you live in the greatest place. So your challenge to us is, don't screw it up. It's hard to imagine 40 to 50 years from now. Technological advances are so commonplace today that we didn't even envision 40 years ago. And I believe that the decisions we are about to make should not be focused on getting it exactly right, but must include the seriousness of getting it wrong. Our challenge in a region is to find balance between too much and not enough. We don't want unconstrained urban sprawl, but we need to have the opportunity to succeed at creating the greatest place. This is a work in progress. And when we get done, it won't be the COO's plan. It'll be a regional plan that all the cities embrace. So let's just stop for a moment. Mike's words in his report. The report is designed as recommendations which are intended to spark conversation and promote dialogue. So let's start the dialogue. 1969. Now I'm going to get a lot of response to this. Everyone born in 1969 or before, stand up, please. Come on. Come on. I know that we don't have that many young people here. Come on. Thank you very much. So we're going to step back in 1969, and no, I'm not going to ask you if you remember 1969. But it would be fun to have that dialogue. So I got some statistics on things in 1969. I did not live here in this region either. I moved here in 1983. But in 1969, the West Side Tunnel, Highway 26, was opened with 2 lanes in 1969 and 2 additional lanes in 1973. The first email was sent in 1969. I didn't even know there was a computer in 1969. And can you imagine how big the room would have to be to house that computer? Today, my car keys have more technology than that computer. For you music lovers, John Lennon recorded "Give Peace a Chance," and gas was 35 cents a gallon. Some statistics, and I'll try and not give you too many statistics, but my CPA background kicks in every once in a while. I got to give you some numbers. Portland population was 380,000. The region's population was 880,000. Of the 880,000, 557,000 was housed in Multnomah County. Hillsboro was slightly less than 15,000 people. 25 years ago, Tektronix was the largest private employer in Oregon, 14,800 people. Today, 1,850 people. Conversely, Intel employed 4,000 people. Today, 16,000 people, contributing $1.2 billion annually to the regional economy. Nike employed 1,450 people. Today, 6,500 people, which is showcased in a 196-acre campus in Beaverton. And just a couple more. I got to tease you with a couple more. In 1980, the population within the UGB was just under 1 million people, 950,000 people. The acreage was 229,000. 2008, it's 1,450,000, up almost 700,000 people. And the acreage, as Mike indicated, slightly over 27,000 acreage have been added. I think the message that we would have is that 30 years ago, the acreage was sufficient. When you add another 700,000 to it, you might be starting to weigh it down a little bit. We look out into the next 40 to 50 years, and we add another 700,000 people. It's going to be a challenge. The plan envisions that our region's population will more than double in the next 50 years. The plan assumes that the majority of those people will be housed in the central urban area, Portland Central. However, statistics will show that more people are moving to Washington County than any other part in the region. I want to read a quote from, again, the COO's report, and the author of that quote is Ethan Seltzer, who is the director of Toulon School of Urban Studies and Planning at Portland State University. The quote is, "Some people want to live in the suburbs and feel strongly that their quality of life, their American dream, is a house and a yard and a fence. Others want to live in a vital city where they are a regular at the coffee shop down the street. It's not that one is better than the other, but it is a fact that within this region, you can choose either. And that's what we're trying to achieve. Not that everyone chooses the same, but that people can find what they want. We need to plan for multiple housing choices in areas where people want to live at prices they can afford. Compact communities is what they're referred to in the report, is just another way of saying a lot of people living close to each other. That works for some people, but not for everyone. We agree that people want to live near where they work. If the jobs are in Washington County, why are we projecting over the next 50 years that the majority of the people will be living in the central urban areas? We need to get residential areas close to employment centers. And that also accomplishes some of the other aspirations of our region. Well, we want to reduce the carbon footprint. We want to reduce the vehicle miles traveled on our freeways. We want to have a livability where we can say we have less pollution. We can only do that by the planning of jobs and residential being in the same area. We know how to do that in Hillsboro, and we're good at it. Our award-winning Orinco station is often showcased by Metro as a shining example of what an urban center should be. We're also already planning for an urban center in the Amber Glen Tannisbourne area off of 185th. Mixed uses, open spaces, light rail, close-by housing for workers in the nearby Silicon Forest, inside the UGB. We need both. The quality of life begins with a job. Anyone who is unemployed, ask them how important that is. We need jobs so people can support themselves and their families. We want to protect and create jobs for the people who live here now and those who will come. Quote from Mike's plan. The multiplier effect of 2 jobs throughout the region for every 1 job of industrial employment that is created. Every industrial job creates 2 residual jobs. Industrial jobs is where we see job growth. We need to work with our emerging industrial clusters and build their needs into our plans, their needs into our plans, not vice versa. We are competing in a global marketplace, and if we cannot compete, we lose. We've been very successful in Hillsboro attracting new industries, and we have strong partnerships with those businesses. SolarWorld, Genentech, Intel, just to name a few. And remember that 5 years ago, we had no idea that we would be the home of the largest solar manufacturing plant in North America is in Hillsboro. The 20,000 acres of available industrial land in the UGB is a little deceiving because many of them are small parcels which we cannot develop industry on. The question is, how much is usable for the kind of industry that we want to attract? Our future planning needs to encourage emerging industries to locate and stay in the region. We have to plan for our region's sustained economic competitiveness and prosperity. Again, a quote from the COO's report. If we do not incorporate adequate amounts of urban reserves into our plan, enough to accommodate potential business expansion and growth, we will not be able to compete in a global economy. No downside to having too much urban reserves, because if it's not needed, we won't use it. We can't afford to make that mistake. Our future depends upon it. So let me put my mayor hat on. Let me tell you a little bit about Hillsboro. We believe we walk our talk. And I firmly believe that I'm the mayor of the finest run city in the region. And I challenge anybody on that, any other mayors, because I believe that. I believe that we have a vision. In 1983, when we moved there, they had a vision. It was coming through the hardest real estate downturn for a long time. Those of you who were around then remember that. Hillsboro had already a master plan, so when we came out of that, we were ready. And I think that's evident in the fact that we have 90,000 people and the 5th largest city in the region today. We've grown tremendously in the last 20 years, and we continue to plan ahead. The 5th largest city in the state did not happen by chance, but by deliberate action and planning on our part. We are a forward-looking city whose planning horizon goes out many years. We value our rural land and believe it should be protected. We work hard to create communities where people live, work, and play. Most of you have heard about the Orenco Station. I've already commented on that. We're working with our partners, our private partners on Amber Glen. We have a number of things focusing on our downtown core. Hillsboro is a blessed community because we have lots of opportunity. And that's what we focus on when we are working with the Metro Regional Plan. We know what we're talking about because we've lived it, we've breathed it, and we've done it. So in summary, what I firmly believe is that we have the capacity to have both employment and livability, agriculture and industry, neighborhoods and green fields. We don't need to bet on one set of predictions being more right or being right. We can win by identifying sufficient reserves, then establishing the guidelines all the cities will grow by, how to control growth without stopping economic growth. Our vision is the same. Our challenge comes with how we get there. We are advocating for a balanced approach to growth, framing the argument as either or discussion does not capture the complexity of the issue. Authors James Collins and Jerry Porras call that the tyranny of the or in their best-selling book, Built to Last: Successful Habits of Visionary Companies. Instead of being oppressed by the tyranny of the or, highly visionary companies liberate themselves with the genius of the and, the ability to embrace both extremes of a number of dimensions at the same time. Instead of choosing between A or B, they figure out a way to have A and B. That's what we need to do as a region. Attracting new business and allowing existing industries to expand is a fundamental job creation. The urban growth boundary needs to be expanded, but in a smart and deliberate way. Smart growth is flexible but restrained. Give us the tools to become complete communities so we don't be so prescriptive that inhibits our creativity and our individuality. Give us the ability to adapt to the unforeseen. What we are asking from you is that you give us the opportunity to be a great community, because together, great communities will be a great region. To use Mike's summary as strategies for sustainable and prosperous region, make the most of what we have. Be good stewards of our investment inside the urban growth boundary. Protect our urban growth boundary. Ensure growth is accommodated within the existing boundary. Walk our talk. Hold ourselves accountable for the plan. And if I could add 2 strategies, one would be give our cities the opportunity to succeed. Don't handcuff them by eliminating options. And the last one, don't screw this up. Consider alternatives, evaluate the risk of not including enough land in urban reserves, and continue to look forward to the future. Thank you.
The first question, as always, will be from our City Club host. Today's host is City Club Governor Barnes Ellis. Barnes is a partner of the law firm of Stoll Reeves, where he practices business litigation. Barnes previously served as a member of the City Club Board of Governors in the 1970s and has served on 2 City Club study committees relating to city governance. Barnes?
Well, thanks, Jerry and Mike. And Jerry, I will refrain from the temptation to reminisce about 1969. My question is for Michael, and it addresses your third topic. Metro and the 3 counties are in the process of implementing a new law calling for designation of urban reserves for some land and rural reserves for other land. It seems very likely that owners of land designated urban reserve will experience an abrupt increase in value of their land, and owners of land designated as rural reserve are likely to experience no increase and probably a decrease in value. But the value of the urban reserve land is enhanced by the designation of other land as rural reserve. What steps are Metro and the counties considering to make this process more equitable for both sets of owners? And specifically, will you support a system of mandatory transferable development credits that will give the owners of the rural reserve some of the upside that now is likely to go only to the owners of urban reserve?
Gee, thanks for an easy one, Barnes, to start. A little softball there to kick things off. Well, first of all, I'm not sure I necessarily agree with the premise that there will be a significant escalation in value immediately upon the creation of urban reserves. We certainly have an experience in the region about how long it takes and the difficulties to go through to actually make new land at the edge urbanizable. And we have some painful examples in just the recent past of how speculation on that land has gone not so well. So I think our experience is going to change a bit that notion of dramatic escalation. to, I think, what your point is regarding transfer of development rights or credits, we made a recommendation within the report that that policymakers consider a transfer of rights system. And we've been working with others in the region and with the legislature about how to put a system like that in place. So yes, we would support some kind of a transfer system of the rights.
We'll now take questions from the floor. Asking questions at Friday Forum is a privilege of City Club membership. When you ask your question, please identify yourself as a City Club member and ask your question in 30 seconds or less.
I'm Ray Polani, a City Club member. We obviously need to reduce automobile dependence. But to successfully compete with the automobile, transit, which is the alternative, needs speed and capacity, especially through downtown. So I ask you, when are we going to begin the construction of the subway? When are we going to use stimulus money to stimulate this tremendous growth that a subway with speed and capacity would do without the negative effects of automobiles?
Subway to Hillsboro. I think the mayor is advocating that in the Hillsboro transportation. No, I'm kidding. Certainly a good question if I take it as a robust mass transit system in the region will absolutely be necessary if we're going to figure out how to both free up the existing system for things like freight movement, which is an important issue, and also to help curb our carbon footprint. We've run a number of scenarios in the last year, incredibly escalating our investments in transit and limiting our expansions of the boundary, and we still have difficulty reducing our footprint in those scenarios, the carbon footprint. And so we have a lot of work to do along those, but one bright, shining hope, this adoption of the Regional Transportation Plan will be the first ever high-capacity transit plan within that Regional Transportation Plan. So we're making progress, Mr. Polani. Thank you for your question.
Jim Zarin, City Club member. Mike Jordan, you mentioned that the plan includes consideration of different types of economic development in the region, and that different types of economic development require different amounts of land. And one of the things I've never understood, and I'm curious how you handled in your report, was how you decided, looking forward, how much land should be allocated to which type of economic development. Is this a straight line projection? Is it aspirational? And I guess I'd ask both of you, how should we as a region do that? Because we get a little nervous in this political culture when we start doing economic planning because we're intervening in the market, and yet we also talk about economic development intervention by the public sector. So I'm just curious how you handled it this time around.
Well, thank you, Jim. At the kind of highest level, anytime you peer into the future, you run risks. And we have divided our approach to the economy that we haven't done in the past on the very short term. So we've looked 5 years out and tried to determine land needs for 5 years. To a very great degree, we have based that on our experience. We have a fair amount of data, and the mayor mentioned one of those data points regarding trends in different components of the economy. For instance, we know that manufacturing is a significant portion of the Portland region economy, perhaps more than the nation for metropolitan areas, but we also know that manufacturing economy is shrinking as it pertains to the rest of the economy. So it will be there in the future, but we believe it will be a smaller share. So we've tried to be pretty nuanced, and we've also tried to take into account what business leaders are seeing in their own niches of the economy. We've done focus groups with them to try and figure out what they see is coming. And when you get beyond 5 years, I will tell you, my crystal ball, and I think everybody's, gets a little blurry. And so we've tried to be more nuanced in thinking about what are the absolutely essential components of the economy that as the mayor noted, create downstream jobs, so the spin-off industries, and where are those jobs that create living wages, and tried to make sure in the recommendation, and quite frankly, the recommendation for reserves, that those niches of the economy are at least considered in our future land needs. So that's the way we've approached it. There's no perfect way to do it, I don't think, Mr. Mayor.
Well, and just to tie on to that, there's a number of aspects that come into whenever you start talking about developing on the edge, cities on the edge, or even property outside of the boundary. Now, when you start looking at how to develop those, and you tie in things like mass transit, and you tie in things like infrastructure, how do we get the basics of water and clean water services, and all of those things to those areas, really puts a different perspective on it. But you can't develop responsibly until you know those answers and that you can meet that criteria. And I think it's pretty interesting to. I've been focusing in my 10 months to primarily catch up with this urban and rural reserve stuff, but every once in a while I'll get my transportation manager to sit down with me, and he'll show me the overlay of the region's transportation plan, and it is phenomenal. The problem is the cost is phenomenal. And so we certainly have aspirations to make all the transportation additions and aspirations that we can afford. And then there's a number of them out there that we know we need to do. We just haven't figured out how to afford them yet. But all of this planning really, to me, is a challenging part of it, but it's also an exciting part, because I really do believe we as a region need to do this and have to do this.
Linda Peters, City Club member, once again. And I retired about 10 years ago as chair of the Washington County Board of Commissioners. I was pleased to hear Mayor Willey use the term smart growth, because I coined that one in 1990 when I was running for county commissioner in Washington County. And I must say I've been very pleased to see how much that concept has been adopted around this region, and what a good job all of our jurisdictions have done of carrying out development that does provide jobs, that does hold a compact urban form, and that does protect the farmland, which nourishes that urban form and those urban economies. I'm puzzled, though, to hear Mayor Willey posit that the risk in this process is that we won't designate enough urban reserve. To me, the risk in this process is that we won't be serious enough about protecting rural reserves. One of the main principles of smart growth is that we learn from experience. I would hope that Hillsboro and all of the cities of Washington County have learned from Hillsboro's experience with the success of aggregating land inside the urban growth boundary, of redeveloping communities, of redeveloping its downtown, of working with its neighboring jurisdictions to design something that works for everyone. And yet, the ask from Hillsboro and the push that Hillsboro and a lot of other Washington County jurisdictions are making as we go forward with this reserves process is always in the direction of give us more urban, give us more urban. How did you get from your experience, now I pose this to Mayor Willey, how did you get from your successful experience using the land that you had and making the best of it to the assumption that the only way you can continue growth is to use land you don't have and can't afford to sacrifice in order to grow outward in the way that we knew 20 years ago we didn't want to do anymore?
Wow, that was a long question.
It was, but it's an important topic, and I hope you can, I'd like to know what your thinking was to get you from success with redevelopment to the need for undeveloped land to...
I get it, Linda.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'd be glad to respond to that, because the Washington County ask is a large ask, and Hillsboro is a significant part of that ask. And so what we've done is, obviously we have commissioned our own planning, we've commissioned our own projections, we've compiled our own aspirations, and then we look out to see what it is that we think we need. We realize that there's a lot of agriculture out there that needs to be protected. Remember that the purpose of this originally was to provide certainty to this whole process of agriculture and residential and industry. And so when you look out on the landscape, there's 106,000 acres of agricultural land we want to ruralize. We want designated rural, 106,000 acres. So why is it that we are looking at a couple thousand acres to be brought in as urbanized potential? And there's two aspects of that. One is, keep in mind that this is a 40 and 50 year plan. Long time out there. We don't have, Mike's crystal ball is fuzzy at 10 years, ours is really fuzzy at 40 years. So all we're trying to do is plan for that, but at the same time, not take away the agricultural aspect of that during that timeline. And the second part is, how did we get there? Because we, in the last couple of years, and all of you would admit the last 2 years have been economically challenged. In the last 2 years, we have had 18 inquiries of businesses coming to Hillsboro. 18. Of the 18, 8 of them wanted 100-acre lots or more. This is the downtime. This is a slow economy. All we're trying to do is anticipate that if the demand is there, we want to be able to facilitate and plan and still have our livability features.
Kurt Wabring, member. What I hear is that there's been extraordinary cooperation among the 3 counties and the decision makers and key players there. My question is about the Columbia River crossing. One of the biggest investments that this region will make of $4 billion plus, that involves Clark County in another state with a whole different background in land use planning. I believe no urban growth boundaries. So my question is, how does this plan deal with it, and to what extent has there been some consultation or collaboration with Clark County in the process?
Well, there is ongoing collaboration regarding the project, as has been mandated by both governors and the DOTs, the Departments of Transportation that are working together. So there is collaboration regarding the project itself. You rightfully point out that we struggle with collaboration on the land use side with our friends in Washington. We are in very different systems, although they do have urban growth boundaries and they do have a Growth Management Act that they work under. But we have taken different approaches over the years. And I guess I would say that, at least implied in your question, I would agree with you that we need to do a much better job at collaborating with what is nearly a third of the metropolitan region north of the river.
My name is Brandon Spencer, City Club member and student at the University of Oregon. My question is regarding Goal 5 of the statewide land use plan as it relates to historic and cultural resources. Both high-density infill in historic districts and expanding suburban developments in rural environments present challenges to our historic buildings and our historic landscapes. What impact will the urban growth boundary expansion or the lack of expansion have on the region's heritage resources? Thanks.
Yeah, when you talk about historical structures, I just came back from a solar conference in Europe in September. And it was my first visit to Europe, and I was absolutely amazed and impressed by what they've been able to sustain and restore many of their historical buildings and castles, and it was impressive to me. Now, they must have a lot of money because it's all government funded, but the fact of the matter is they have a priority in that. And I would like to think that we also have a priority in protecting that part of our history. And obviously, as we don't increase the UGB and the density within the UGB increases, there's going to be more pressure put on to how do we do that And certainly, if it costs money, where do we get that money? But I think, from my standpoint, I think that is absolutely a significant part of the master plan. So we must protect those areas.
Just very briefly, local governments all have adopted Goal 5 parts of their comprehensive plans that are compliant with the state's requirements. But we have a long history in this region of reusing our buildings, and especially in Portland. But we've seen it also in smaller communities, in their downtowns, in their main streets. So I'm confident that we're going to find a way to reuse historical structures, maintain their character and their assets in the community. So thanks for your question.
Well, we've run out of time for further questions, and we'll have to stop for this week. Please join us next week for a talk about Oregon's economic recovery with Congressman David Wu. As we close, please join me in expressing our appreciation to today's speakers, Michael Jordan and Jerry Willey. We're adjourned.